Welcome to another of the great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter for consideration today is from the Old Testament book of Job. Job chapter 1. We'll begin reading in verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them, and took them, and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you." Now Job arose and tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. You know, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask God. I've heard that pose from time to time. I have a few questions I'd like to know. Mostly science stuff, the big ones about creation and dinosaurs and the speed of light. Yeah, really important stuff, I know. Still, there is the great looming question that mankind has pondered and pined for over the centuries and millennia. That is the question of why all the pain and suffering. We stumble through this subject as best we can to console those who endure pain and sorrow and suffering here now. Yet it is usually time that brings healing, if at all. The book of Job has been called by many one of the greatest pieces of literature in the world, and that's pretty good company. The first time I read the book of Job was as a teenager in, of all things, a high school world literature class. I couldn't grasp what was going on. A rich man, the devil, and God, and three so-called friends going back and forth about what he did wrong. Even today, these handful of years separated from my high school years, I struggle with the complexity of this book and the questions posed. We are introduced to Job and his family in chapter 1. The exact date of the events of this book are unknown. Beyond this book, Job is mentioned only 3 other times in Scripture, twice in Ezekiel and once in the New Testament letter to James. As to those who doubt that Job really existed, that in reality this is a work of allegory or a parable or a legend, well, all I can say is you just haven't really examined the evidence and leave it at that. Now, I could ramble on about the internal evidences, but for the skeptic, there's never enough evidence. But if you'd like to read about the origins of Job, I would recommend Albert Barnes' notes on the book of Job. So in the little bit of time that we have here together, let's peer into what we have been given in this most intriguing of chapters, chapter 1 of Job. We're given a brief biography of Job in the opening verses, enough to give us insight into his character, blameless and upright, and as the patriarch, one who cared about his family. His possessions put him as one of the greatest of all the people of the East. And by my count, there are some 351 questions posed in this book. But the first 2 asked by God set the tone for what is about to happen. The first is asked to Satan by God, "From where have you come?" Now, God knew exactly where Satan had been, because the next question is not one of which God plunks Job before Satan to see if he can break him, but one which God knows that Satan has set his eye upon him. In verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" In effect, have you set your heart on Job? As Scripture unfolds for us, we learn more about the nature of Satan. For Peter warns us in 1 Peter 5:8, "Be sober-minded and watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." And that's exactly what he's doing here in the book of Job. John records in Revelation about what Satan seeks to do to us. In Revelation chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, "The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, 'Now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of Christ has come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them night and day before God.'" Now, we have the first accusation made against Job by Satan when he asked in verses 9 and 10 of chapter 1, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." Isn't that just like the devil? Indeed, his nature has not changed from the garden. Jesus knew this when he spoke to the Jews in John 8:44. "You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do the Father's desires." He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. God allows Satan to carry out his plans in an attempt to prove that man cannot possibly love God if he has everything taken from him. His servants, his livestock, his children, all gone in one fell swoop. What happened proves the worthiness of Job. To feel the grief and pain of loss that deep and yet not find fault with God or blame him in any way tells us of that character spoken of in the very first verse of this book, and deals a mighty blow against the accuser here in Job 1:21 and 22. "And he said, 'Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. To grasp the concept that all we have is from God is a monumental statement of faith. Far too often we may think that what we have is that which we have of our own strength, intellect, and ingenuity contrived for ourselves. Yet the wise mind realizes we are but servants and stewards of all we possess. But Satan is not through with Job, and once again in chapter 2 sets his heart on destroying this upright and blameless man by taking his health. As the book goes on, we shall meet the likes of Zophar, Eliphaz, and Bildad, and Elihu. Job's wife will resoundingly rebuke Job for his faith. But in the end, God will have the final answer. But we'll leave that for another lesson. What is the takeaway from this remarkable book? Does it give us the definitive answer once and for all as to the reason and cause of all suffering in this world? If you're looking for an easy answer to plug into each and every situation in life that will satisfactorily assuage every person's need in their moment of sorrow, well, you won't find it. At least not in the way you think. Solomon writes with wisdom when he tells us in Ecclesiastes 3:11, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end." Yes, God has set eternity into our hearts, the ability to see beyond what the common creatures around us do. We understand there is more to this life than eating and procreating. Yet we simply cannot, for all our abilities to reason, see the whole picture. When God answers Job in the end, his series of questions and illustrations make Job and us realize that God alone can grasp such things. And on that day when we shall see the Lord face to face, it may be that it is not questions that we have, but praise and adoration for his wisdom. Is that enough for you? And Lord willing, let's meet again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters in the Bible.